computer. Chevron 1 is holding. Chevron 1 is locked in place.
Power output at 23%.
The first time they built the Stargate, it looked like a giant tire. Everyone on set knew the movie was dead if they couldn't fix it. So they repainted the entire 22-foot ring overnight and hoped for the best. Then the visual effects supervisor got fired. And then fired again. And again. He lost count of how many times Roland Emmerich told him to leave. But somehow, working from a garage with iced tea powder and a drill, he created the most iconic portal effect in film history. What happened in that garage changed science fiction forever. Kurt Russell kept saying no to Stargate, and for a long time, no one understood why. It turned out he had been reading the wrong script, an early draft that should never have left the writer's hands. So every time the offer came back around, he pushed it aside without a second thought. The filmmakers kept trying because they needed his name badly. They were making the movie without a major studio, and foreign buyers cared more about his reputation than anything written on a page. When he finally saw the real shooting script, everything shifted. He looked up and said, "This isn't so bad," and that small change opened the door for the producers to offer him $7 million, which was a huge piece of a $55 million budget. His involvement became the movie's anchor, and by the time Stargate opened at number 1 on October 28, 1994, with a $16.6 million weekend, the gamble made perfect sense. But behind the scenes, James Spader was having a completely different experience. He told Entertainment Weekly that the script was awful, and he meant it. He had just come from respected films and was stuck in a strange career moment where he needed the paycheck even though the material didn't inspire him. The fact that the script felt terrible actually drew him in because he found the badness oddly fascinating. Still, his frustration didn't disappear. He clashed with Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin over the dialogue, pushing back whenever a line felt cheap. While Russell had made peace with being a steady leading man who didn't question every flaw, Spader was still wrestling with his standards. Even so, he delivered a performance that helped the film reach $196.6 million worldwide, nearly 4 times its budget. The tension kept building until it reached a boiling point. One day, Spader refused to come out of his trailer. He said the pages needed to be rewritten, and he wasn't going anywhere until that happened. Production froze, crews waited, money bled away. Devlin and Emmerich grabbed pens and started rewriting on the spot just to get the cameras rolling again. Then, as everything stalled, Russell snapped. He marched straight to Spader's trailer and demanded answers. Spader fired back, asking him to admit the obvious. The dialogue is horrible. That moment became legendary because Russell answered with complete honesty. Of course it's horrible. That's why they pay you $1 million. If it was brilliant, you'd do it for free. He had accepted the business side of filmmaking in a way Spader simply couldn't. And that single line summed up years of their different experiences. Money mattered more than ever because the entire project was financed independently. Every major studio had rejected Stargate, insisting science fiction was dead. Emmerich and Devlin had to raise all $55 million on their own, which meant every delay was a financial threat. They only found distribution because MGM happened to have an empty slot in their release calendar. Even then, studio executives doubted Emmerich's promise to deliver the movie for that amount. They assumed it would cost $100 million. When the movie became a hit, earning over $71 million in the United States alone, the success proved that the risk had been worth it and set the stage for the long-running franchise that followed. Still, even simple things went wrong. The first time the team built the 22-foot ring prop, they painted it flat black so it would look ancient and mysterious. Under the studio lights, it looked like a giant Goodyear tire. Devlin later said it had no depth or texture at all, and instead of feeling alien, it felt cheap and heavy. They knew the entire movie depended on the Stargate looking powerful, so they took a risk and repainted the whole thing metallic silver between shooting days. The new color caught light in completely different ways. Floodlights, torches, and moonlight bounced across the metal, creating depth that hadn't existed before. Suddenly, the ring shimmered like something ancient and advanced at the same time. That rushed decision became the visual identity of the entire franchise. The silver gate with glowing symbols became a symbol of everything Stargate stood for. And without that shift, the movie might have been laughed out of test screenings. Instead, the portal became iconic, showing up in posters, sequels, television sets, and props that fans still recreate decades later. To bring this world to life, the production team needed space, so they moved into the Spruce Goose Dome in Long Beach. It was the largest freestanding aluminum dome in the world, built at a cost of $25 million to house Howard Hughes's huge Hercules aircraft. After the plane moved to Oregon in 1992, the dome became an empty giant waiting to be filled. Inside that massive space, workers built Stargate Command, Ra's pyramid ship, and everything in between. 300 people spent 6 months on it, creating sets that covered more ground than 4 football fields. The scale helped the movie feel bigger than its budget. Even after filming, chaos followed. In the final week before delivery, the editors decided the movie needed more visual effects. Not a handful of shots, but 66 new ones. That meant the effects team had to work night after night, with no break. Visual effects artist Mitch Drain used an early real-time compositing system called Domino to push through the impossible workload. He finished all 66 shots in just 7 days, and every one of them worked. The late additions gave the film more spectacle and helped tie together scenes that had felt thin. While adding digital effects helped, the visual heart of the movie came from a garage experiment. After Roland Emmerich rejected every idea for the gate's liquid surface and even fired VFX supervisor Jeffrey Oken and cinematographer David Stump retreated to a small plexiglass tank in a garage. They filled it with water and iced tea powder, then stuck a wooden beam on a drill to mix it. When the swirl settled, they saw the strange spiral that became the signature strudel effect behind the gate. Okun remembered that mercury tanks had once been used to create mirror effects, so he filmed the underside of the water from a tilted angle. That small moment became the heart of the portal. The experiments didn't stop there. Someone found an air mortar, and they fired it into the tank at 26 pounds of pressure. The entire block of water flew out and landed on top of Dave Stump, soaking him completely. They lowered the pressure to just over 2 pounds, filmed again, and finally captured the explosive kawoosh, followed by the receding vortex. When Oken showed this to Emmerich, expecting to be fired again, the director grinned and said, "This is fantastic." Years later, when the television team for Stargate SG-1 tried to recreate the effect, they didn't know the original pressure settings. Their first test used 50 pounds of pressure. The water shot everywhere, destroyed the setup, and drenched the equipment. After more trial and error, they finally matched the look, choosing practical water blasts instead of pure CGI because they wanted the effect to feel real. Creating the full Stargate sequence demanded frame-by-frame work. The team shot liquids at high speeds, sometimes at 120 frames per second, then layered the frames by hand. Rendering the journey through the gate took 30 days on the computers available in 1994. When Emmerich saw the finished version, he hated it so much that he fired Oken again. Pressure mounted, tempers rose. Okun and artist Jeff Williams even ended up shouting on the roof before laughing and going back to work. They recomposed existing elements in new color spaces instead of re-rendering, and that version finally earned Emmerich's approval. The challenges continued on set. 2 cameras had to be positioned at perfect mirror angles for actors walking through the gate. Lasers built into the prop were used to mark where the water plane would be added later. But the lasers came with warnings about eye damage. When Russell heard that looking at them could cause blindness, he refused to walk through until someone proved it was safe. Okun stood in the beam for 5 full seconds to show him it wouldn't hurt. Even after that, Russell still kept his eyes closed while walking forward. Meanwhile, the second camera operator kept adjusting his setup every time the crew looked away, ruining the mirror angles until the cinematographer finally put a stop to it. The work on those morph shots in Stargate stretched out longer than anyone expected, and it slowly turned into 9 months of frustration for the team. They were supposed to create only 5 shots, yet each one kept slipping away from them because nothing behaved the way it should. At first, they trusted brand new off-the-shelf morphing software, thinking it would save time. During early tests, the program fell apart so badly that ears drifted away from faces and floated across the screen. Roland Emmerich watched the tests and kept saying it needed to look mechanical, not smooth, which made things even harder. His demand led the team into a strange idea they called negative space. They wanted objects to fold into places that should not exist, and the more they explored it, the more impossible it seemed. Motion control rigs took entire nights to set up and could only be used for the first shot of the morning before being torn down again. Eventually, the team gave up on every tool they had bought and wrote their own software from scratch. Even today, Okun admits the morphs still look slightly wrong, and somehow that wrongness gives them a strange alien feeling that stays with the viewer. The work on negative space created its own maze. Okun had a background in physics, yet this idea pushed him to the edge because it went against everything he understood. He struggled to explain it to Emmerich and to the artists who had to bring it to life. They were trying to show objects folding into dimensions that had no rules. Emmerich often sat through demonstrations with a cigarette and said it would never work, but Okun kept trying to make the math of it fit what the film needed. The morphing helmets were not even real 3D models. They were 2D pieces that needed perfect frame-by-frame compositing. The team had to shoot actors with the headdresses, then shoot them again without them, then build layers that wiped away and matched every camera shift. No one had attempted anything like this before 1994, and the technique became one of the earliest steps toward the mechanical morphing style that made Stargate stand out. Those serpent guard helmets added a whole new problem because the actors could not see through them at all. The helmets were heavy rubber molded over plastic frames, and the detailed serpent design covered everything. There were no eye holes and no hidden slits. That turned every action scene into a hazard. Performers had to walk slowly, memorize the ground under them, and trust the crew guiding them into each position. Fans on Reddit later joked about Jaffa marching into walls or stepping off cliffs, and the joke worked because it was close to the truth. The helmets measured about 24 inches in every direction, and even though they became iconic, they were never practical. When Stargate SG-1 came along with a much smaller budget, the show avoided any attempt to recreate the complex helmet morphs from the film because it would have been far too expensive. The glowing eyes inside those helmets came from a simple trick that hid batteries inside the costume. Each helmet held 2 9-volt batteries taped to wood inside the headpiece. Wires ran through the structure and powered small lights behind resin ruby eyes. When they lit up, the effect felt organic and threatening without showing any visible technology. The inside of the helmets had actor names written by hand, along with numbers for tracking. Some replicas later used watch batteries glued to LEDs, proving how basic the idea really was. The helmets eventually sold at auctions for thousands of dollars, partly because of the craftsmanship and partly because they carried a real sense of weight and menace. The glowing eyes stood out so well that cosplayers still copy the design today. Because the actors could not see, every fight scene had to be choreographed with military precision. Stunt performers learned routines while the helmets were off, then performed them blind once filming began. Crew members had to move them into place and whisper guidance between takes. Viewers can notice it once they know the truth and see how carefully the Jaffa step through the chaos around them. Fans later joked that a Jaffa would stick a helmet into danger, hope for the best, and fire blindly. In the lore, the helmets were said to have nanotech displays that folded away into negative space, but the show rarely depicted this because of cost. Watching the battle scene with Kurt Russell makes the challenge obvious because the guards move like men who know one wrong step could send them tumbling. Then the camera shifts to the story of Jay Davidson, who was never trying to be an actor in the first place. He was a fashion assistant in London when someone spotted him at a party in 1991 while he was drunk and laughing. He worked with designers who made Princess Diana's wedding dress, and he had no plans to act until Neil Jordan cast him in The Crying Game without even asking him to audition. His performance in 1992 earned him an Oscar nomination, and he arrived at the 1993 ceremony in riding breeches and thigh-high boots because he followed his own style. Even after all that attention, he said he hated the sudden fame and never wanted to be known for acting. He was already planning to go back to fashion before his nomination even settled. The moment Stargate producers approached him in 1993, he wanted to refuse without hurting anyone's feelings. He picked a simple solution. He asked for $1 million, thinking the number was so outrageous that they would walk away. Instead, they agreed on the spot. Suddenly, he had to do a film he never wanted. That single paycheck ended up defining his net worth for years. After filming in 1994, he stepped away and returned to fashion almost immediately. He did not fully commit until he saw the costumes Joseph Porro created for Ra. They were layered with velvet, lame, leather, and fiberglass pieces shaped with Egyptian symbols. One robe used purple, turquoise, and gold lame with pleated panels that shimmered under light. The cape stretched behind him with huge wood and metal panels carved with composite cobras. The headdress alone held lapis at the forehead and dangling red resin panels set on copper bars. The care put into these designs finally made the role feel meaningful to someone who valued craftsmanship more than the spotlight. His personal choices brought new issues to the set. He refused to remove his nipple piercings during shirtless scenes, so costumes had to be adjusted to hide them. Camera angles shifted, lighting changed, and Porro's team kept shaping wardrobe pieces to cover tiny details that kept slipping into focus. Then things took a strange turn when Davidson's assistant vanished on the second day of filming with his phone, his cash, and his methadone. He panicked, and the production felt the weight of his stress for days. Roland Emmerich later said he could write a whole book about what they went through while working with him. As filming continued, Davidson struggled to deliver lines because of his substance issues. They gave him giant cue cards with phonetic spellings, yet he still found it hard to read them. Devlin recalled that Davidson was not what they imagined when they wrote the role. Test audiences reacted poorly and asked why Kurt Russell did not simply crush the character. That pushed the filmmakers back into the editing room. They added a fiery glow to Ra's eyes, changed the voice, and revealed an alien parasite inside his body. they reshaped the entire character into the last survivor of a dying alien race. When Devlin met Davidson before the release to explain the changes, he found him sober and relieved they had not removed him. Davidson told him that they saved him, believing he had ruined the film. The edits lifted the test scores and helped Stargate avoid disaster, while also planting the seeds for the future of the franchise. Originally, Ra was never supposed to be an alien. Devlin explained that he was meant to be a human who served the real aliens. Davidson's strange presence shifted everything. Instead of reshooting, they embraced the oddness and invented the idea of an alien parasite controlling a human host. This one decision later branched into the entire mythology of the Goa'uld. The voice in the final film was not Davidson's either. His natural tone lacked the power they needed, so the team rebuilt every line using pitch shifts, layered tracks, and echoing effects. Composer David Arnold's music wrapped around the new voice until the character felt ancient and godlike. Test audiences still struggled to understand the story, so the team added subtitles to explain key lines. They added clearer alien dialogue and new shots that revealed Ra's true form seconds before his destruction. These small touches changed everything. Suddenly the story clicked, and audiences responded. The film climbed out of trouble and settled into an unexpected success. Horus' costumes guided the final shape of the character in ways no one saw coming. When the filmmakers watched Davidson in full costume, towering under the massive headdress with glowing eyes and layers of shimmering fabric, they understood he could never be just another human villain. The design made him feel like a towering deity, and that pushed them even further toward the alien identity that shaped the franchise. Yuma and Buttercup Valley turned into another world once the crew arrived in the summer heat of 1993. The desert had already carried the footsteps of Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark, yet the filmmakers still wanted to push it further. They built towering alien structures right in the sand, shaping them after ancient Egyptian designs so they looked like they had risen from the dunes themselves. Every time the crew finished a take, a team rushed in with brushes and rakes to wipe away footprints so the place stayed untouched. July was chosen on purpose because it kept tourists and dune buggies away. It gave them silence. It gave them space to dream up an entire planet. And when they needed enormous alien creatures walking across the sand, they hung huge prosthetic frames over horses to make them look like something impossible. The transformation was so convincing that after the film came out, other filmmakers started calling to ask where this strange place was, because they wanted their whole movie to look like that. But all that beauty came at a cost. The heat was merciless. Temperatures shot past 120 degrees Fahrenheit and refused to drop. Plastic water bottles melted if someone forgot them under the sun. Crew members buried their drinks in the sand to cool them. Cameras jammed from overheating. Film warped. People dropped to the ground from heat exhaustion almost every day. And paramedics stayed nearby because they knew it would keep happening. Actors inside the Horus Guard helmets suffered the worst, since there was barely any air inside. The costume lights made it even hotter. They could hardly breathe. So the schedule kept shifting between the first touch of dawn and the last hour before night, when the heat dropped from deadly to simply unbearable. Even the cameras needed special cooling systems to stay alive long enough to capture footage. Still, the film needed crowds, and the budget couldn't handle hundreds of extras wandering in the background. So the crew came up with something simple and strangely clever. They built stick figures, wrapped them in cloth robes, and planted them far behind the actors. They looked like villagers and workers standing in the distance. It saved thousands of dollars without anyone noticing in the final shots. Then, when the story reached the final battle, They brought in around 1,200 real extras who had to race up and down the dunes covered in heavy robes under the Arizona sun. They mixed real people in the front, stick figures in the back, and extra images shot on green screen around cooking fires to fill out the alien world. Everything layered together until the crowd seemed huge, without the production spending money it didn't have. The team also learned to chase the light. They watched the clock every afternoon because golden hour turned the desert into something magical. The ruins glowed. The sand softened. Everything looked like a painting. That gentle light became one of the film's biggest strengths, and the cinematographer worked closely with the team to capture as much of it as they could in those short minutes. They even built miniature versions of the city towers and shot them on blue screen right there in the desert, so the sunlight on the models matched the real structures. That attention to light made the world feel whole. It helped distinguish Abydos from every other desert planet audiences had seen. Miniatures and matte paintings carried much of the heavy work. The Pyramid spacecraft was built as a detailed scale model, carved with tiny hieroglyphs. It was filmed separately and composited into the desert scenes. Then everything changed when the studio recut the movie and suddenly decided they wanted 66 new visual effects shots. They gave the team 1 week. It should have been impossible. But visual effects supervisor Jeffrey Okun found an artist who owned a domino system, a rare machine that allowed real-time compositing. Instead of waiting hours for each layer to render, the artist could see everything instantly and adjust it on the spot. Working non-stop, he finished all 66 shots in 7 days. The combination of practical towers built in the desert and miniature buildings shot on blue screen created a seamless city. Roland Emmerich didn't like digital effects at first, but once he watched a test where bullets froze in mid-air, he realized miniature work had limits, and digital tricks could open doors he hadn't expected. Okun's own story during the movie became a legend. Emmerich fired him more than once, sometimes angrily, sometimes casually, but every time Okun delivered something impressive, the director acted like the firing never happened. The most famous moment came when Okun's team tested the watery gate effect. They kept adjusting air pressure in a water tank, trying to make the right ripple, and finally discovered that 2.1 pounds per square inch gave the perfect look. Okun walked up to Emmerich and said he knew he was fired, but the director should see this anyway. When Emmerich watched it, he suddenly changed his tone and insisted he never fired anyone because the effect was extraordinary. The working relationship was chaotic, but it produced results that shaped the film's identity. Even on weekends, Okun kept getting calls for new ideas. He might have been fired on paper, but the movie still needed him. Emmerich hated computers, yet kept reaching for effects that only computers could handle. After the bullet test impressed him, he started reviewing every digital experiment they had done. Suddenly, he became excited about digital possibilities. The calls became constant. Ideas bounced back and forth. And despite the confusion surrounding Okun's employment, the effects kept improving. While all this happened, another crisis rose in post-production. After the recut, the editors demanded those 66 new shots, and the team had a single week to finish them. They blended miniature pyramids, matte painted skies, explosions, and digital layers that took incredible precision. Finishing them meant saving the movie, and the domino system became the only reason the schedule survived. The tool didn't last long in the industry, but for this one fragile moment, it was the machine that held the entire film together. The visual effects team worked entirely in the photochemical era when everything still touched real film. They used 35mm Panavision cameras and Kodak stock. There were no modern digital pipelines, no instant playback, no color grading, the way filmmakers do today. The watery gate effect came from a real water tank and air cannons. They shot it at 120 frames per second. The Stargate wormhole sequence needed 30 full days to render on old computers. They could only show Emmerich still frames and diagrams while the machine worked. Labs handled the color timing. Optical printers blended layers of film. Multiple animation houses worked frame by frame. They built miniatures, replaced skies, painted matte backgrounds, and combined it all with barely any digital tools to guide them. What they managed with those limits still impresses people decades later. And while the effects team pushed forward, costume designer Joseph A. Porro built some of the most complex outfits ever used in a science fiction film. Ra's costume had 5 separate pieces and required a team to assemble. There was a velvet robe in purple and turquoise, with multicolor lame panels, a leather vest carved with Egyptian symbols, an enormous undercape ending in wood, and metal panels decorated with composite cobras, a fiberglass headdress etched in gold and set with lapis and tiger eye stones. The production also made more than 600 weapons for extras. Some were cast from clear resin to look like obsidian, and they took weeks to finish. All of this happened under a production budget of $55 million, and the film later earned more than $196 million worldwide. Jay Davidson, who played Ra, entered the project under a spotlight of his own. He asked for $1 million to take the role, and actually got it. That part is verified, but the work itself was difficult. He struggled with his lines. The directors found the performance different from what they had imagined. Davidson confessed later that he disliked fame altogether. Internet stories about tantrums and fights float around, but they lack solid proof from the production team. What is documented is the struggle with the performance and the payment he received. The practical armor worn by the Horus guards turned into a source of pain for the actors. The glowing eyes came from real bulbs hidden inside, powered by battery packs, and the helmets had almost no ventilation. Installing them could take 6 hours. Once the actors were inside, removing them wasn't easy. Every bathroom break became a big problem. The heat inside the helmets added to the desert temperatures outside, so some performers nearly fainted. Medical teams were called more than once. Extras wearing heavy robes for the final battle ran over dunes in blistering heat. The Mastage creature costumes were too heavy for horses to move naturally, so the team built miniature versions for dogs instead. Despite all the difficulty, Ra's look became the most memorable visual element in the film. The morphing helmets came from a clever trick. They filmed the actors without headdresses, then again with them, and blended the shots using transitional segments that matched camera movement. A team of around 40 people wrote their own software to pull it off. Combined with Porro's detailed fabrics, gold discs, hieroglyphs, and headdresses set with stones, Ra transformed into something iconic that carried the film's identity.